When someone mentions New Orleans, what images come to mind? A collage of pictures of Mardi Gras, New Orleans Saints football, swamps, Creole food, Dixieland jazz, or the French Quarter? And what makes the French Quarter such an interesting place? New Orleans was built around the French Quarter. It's a melting pot of architectural styles, including French, Spanish, Creole, and American design. Though after multiple fires over the years, mostly Spanish remains. Buildings are adorned with ornate, wrought iron railings, numerous balconies, and vivid, Caribbean-inspired colors. But at the corner of Governor Nicholas Street and Royal Street, in the heart of the French Quarter, sits a house that draws curious visitors for a very different reason. The stately mansion at 1140 Royal Street draws visitors for its prominent architecture for sure, but also draws masses to see ghosts and to hear the story of one of the darkest periods in New Orleans history. The house is known as the Lalaurie Mansion, named after a family who drove away into infamy in the 1830s after a fire ripped through their home. Tour guides have had their satchels yanked, and tour groups have seen streetlights explode almost on cue. But why would there be ghosts? The Lalauries escaped, so who could be haunting the place? To answer that, let's take a stroll back through time to set up the cast of characters. In March 1787, Delphine Lalaurie was born in New Orleans, a part of the Spanish territory at the time, and under Spanish rule. The Lalauries were a very prominent family of European Creoles, and Delphine was raised as a privileged child, enjoying a position high in local societal circles. Her uncle was even the governor of 2 Spanish-American provinces. At just 13 years old, in 1800, Delphine married a highly ranked officer in Spain's Royal Army. As was typical for people with their social standing, they often traveled to Spain and to other Spanish territories. Just before Delphine gave birth to their daughter in 1804, they were en route to Madrid when they stopped over in Havana, Cuba. Her husband became violently ill and died there, leaving 17-year-old Delphine with a new baby. In 1808, Delphine married a second time to a prominent Frenchman, Jean Blanc, a banker, lawyer, and legislator. Blanc came from a family with almost as much prestige as the Lalaurie family. Delphine and Jean had 4 children. When Jean died in 1816, he left Delphine again a widow, but now with 5 children. She remained a widow until 1825. As was common for society women of the time, Delphine had slaves. In 1825, a now middle-aged Delphine met a Frenchman named Dr. Leonard Louis Nicolas Lalaurie. Dr. Lalaurie had come to New Orleans claiming to be trained in the new French treatment for hunchbacks. He did not come from a prominent family. One of Delphine's daughters, Pauline, was reported to have had some disorder of the spine, which was perhaps what led Delphine and Dr. Lalaurie to meet. They married later in 1825. Dr. Lalaurie was much younger than Delphine. Together they had 1 child. And because Dr. Lalaurie was not exactly wealthy, he brought just $2,000 to the marriage, which some sources say was a spot of significant conflict between Dr. Lalaurie and Delphine. Dr. Lalaurie was said to be brutally abusive toward Delphine, and he was often away working long hours, which left Delphine to her own devices. There were rumors that Dr. Lalaurie could have been having an affair with someone much younger than Delphine, quite possibly one of the female slaves. In 1831, Edward Dufessat sold his unfinished home at 1140 Royal Street to the Lalauries. But rumors had already begun to circulate about the Lalauries, and Delphine in particular. It was well documented that Delphine was civil to her slaves in public, even granting emancipation to 2 of them. Though the rumors also noted that she was actually a very cruel, violent mistress of the house. She was rumored to have kept her 70-year-old cook shackled to the stove and starving. Other rumors were that Delphine kept secret slaves for her husband, Dr. Lalaurie, to practice his Haitian voodoo medicine. She also reportedly beat her daughters if they showed any kindness to the slaves. Her children later told of how much they feared her temper. In 1832, Delphine actually applied for a legal separation from Dr. Lalaurie because he had, in her view, insulted and wounded her deeply in public. According to Louisiana and New Orleans laws, slaves were to be treated and kept up with certain standards of living. The laws were to prevent the mistreatment of slaves by their owners. There were separate quarters for the slaves at the Lalaurie Mansion, but they were barely adequate. At least twice, responding to rumors of mistreatment, representatives from court were dispatched to the Lalaurie residence to remind them of those laws. When asked about Delphine allegedly mistreating her slaves, Dr. Lalaurie curtly told the court representatives to mind their own business. But even while the Lalauries were being investigated for alleged abuse, there were 2 incidents that proved to be true. One involved a young male slave jumping out of a 3rd-story window to his death to avoid being punished by Delphine. That window was cemented shut and remains so to this day. The other incident involved a 12-year-old slave girl named Leah. One day, Leah was combing Delphine's hair and pulled a bit too harshly, sending Delphine into a rage. Instead of escaping through a window, Leah went up to the roof, pursued by Delphine armed with a whipping strap. Leah jumped off the roof to her death. Delphine later buried the child in the yard. In 1834, the Lalaurie Mansion was deliberately set ablaze by the cook, who preferred suicide and fire as an alternative to Delphine's brutal abuse. When bystanders and responders arrived at the burning house, many found it odd that there were no slaves around. The Lalauries had already fled by coach. The responders began searching the mansion to try to locate and rescue the slaves before they were incinerated by the fire. Nobody could have imagined the horrors they were about to discover. The cook was an elderly female slave who was indeed chained to the stove. She survived the fire. Once the responders began breaking down doors, the extent of the horror was revealed. In the attic, 7 slaves were found chained to walls. They had been horribly mutilated and tortured. They told the investigators that they had been in that situation for months, and they felt Delphine only kept them alive to intensify and prolong their suffering. But there was more. Uncorroborated stories from responders described slaves found with their eyes gouged out, skin flayed open, mouths filled with excrement and sewn shut. Some had their limbs stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. There was a report that a slave woman had many bones deliberately broken and reset to make her look like a crab. Slaves were found with holes drilled into their skulls and spoons nearby so that their brains could be stirred. There was even one woman found wrapped up in human intestines. There were also dead bodies. The corpses were mutilated and organs either outside their bodies or missing altogether. As for numbers, some say that there were only a few mangled corpses found, while others say that there were over 100. When all of this ghastly information hit the bystanders outside, over 4,000 angry townsfolk ransacked the mansion, breaking windows, knocking down doors, etc. The house was left in a state of ruin. But what happened to the Lalauries? Document trails say that Delphine and Dr. Lalaurie reunited with their unmarried children at Delphine's niece's house. While there, the Lalauries signed over power of attorney, allowing two relatives to manage the Lalaurie estate locally. In June 1834, poet William Cullen Bryant was sailing to France on a ship called the Poland when he recognized the Lalauries. The Lalauries sought refuge with Dr. Lalaurie's family in France. Unimpressed by the standard of living, Delphine, along with her youngest children, fled to Paris without Dr. Lalaurie. French records show that she died on December 7th, 1849. Her body was disinterred from the grave in Paris in 1851 and sent back to be reinterred at St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans. There is a grave marker in the St. Louis Cemetery with her maiden name and the date of death. Strangely, court documents from 1850 suggest that she was alive and well, as she sought to contest the executors of her brother's will in the Louisiana Supreme Court. Given the conflicting information available, we actually don't know when or where she died. So was this the end for the Lalaurie Mansion? Like many other stately manors, it was repurposed in time. However, the evil seeded from the horrors of Madame Delphine Lalaurie's torturous reign may still reside within the walls. 1140 Royal Street has been subdivided into apartments, used as a musical conservatory, a school for girls, a homeless shelter, and is now a private residence. There are no tours allowed inside the property, so tours have to remain on the street and sidewalk. When the building was being used for apartments in 1894, a resident was brutally murdered in his apartment and his room ransacked. Police thought it was from an attempted robbery, though the man had spoken to others about a demon presence who wasn't going to stop until he was dead. When the house was used as a school for girls, there were documented reports of girls being attacked by a ghostly woman who left bruises and scars. Since the late 1800s, residents have reported hearing moans from the rooms where the slaves were kept. Disembodied footsteps are heard throughout the house. Some visitors have even reported being overcome by a negative energy. The building's owners did not fare well either. One owner ended up in an asylum, and another fell into a coma. But regardless of which spirits still haunt the Lalaurie Mansion, there's no shortage of wild stories. It is unclear what turned a woman of high society into a brutal serial killer. Was it the abuse she endured from Dr. Lalaurie? Was her husband having an affair with a slave? And while it's generally accepted that Dr. Lalaurie did not participate in the abuse of the slaves, he certainly allowed it to continue with his silent complicity. And perhaps most shockingly, from some sources, Delphine never felt that she did anything wrong. she was only doing what people of her social standing did, behind closed doors. My name is Scott, and thank you so much for watching. We're a group of curious and passionate humans, creating documentary-style content for those who share our curiosity, ask questions, and seek to dig deeper in a world where almost everything isn't quite what it seems. We are Mystery Syndicate. If you like what we do, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, leave a comment, and give this video a like. And to be notified when we post new videos, hit that notification bell. Also, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and for exclusive merchandise and our blog, visit our website at www.mysterysyndicate.com. And for those that wish to support our channel, please visit Mystery Syndicate on Patreon. We have a variety of new patron tiers with tons of great benefits. If you want to see your name on a future video, be sure to check it out. From all of us at Mystery Syndicate, thank you again. We sincerely appreciate your support.